Hi, I'm Michael Shannon, and in this course, I'll describe the ubiquitous nature of social engineering and hijacking threats. You know, getting dressed up in costumes and wearing masquerade outfits is kind of fun, and it's interesting for, Halloween and maybe Mardi Gras. But when it comes to a professional environment or your business, people impersonating or doing hoaxes, presenting themselves as someone that they're not, actually isn't funny at all. And a malicious cracker, if they're going to do impersonation or masquerading, which is really part of social engineering, it's going to involve some preparation and some prior reconnaissance and information gathering before they attempt the exploit. And impersonation is often a key factor. Masquerading is first attempted remotely through IP spoofing and then possibly over the phone, maybe using email, SMS texting, instant messaging, and then if none of those things get information that they need, they'll do it in person, if the payoff from getting your data and your information is worth it. The attacker can then obtain records about an organization, your marketing plans, your corporate secrets, your formulas, information about your employees, your customers, PII, and other critical data. If a cracker's going to do social engineering and they're going to pose as some other person, what are some of the options they have? Well, they can masquerade as a janitor or a cleaning service, a pest control company. They can be a fire inspector or a building inspector. They may pose as a temporary or contract worker. They may even position themselves as a security professional coming in doing a penetration test or an audit. They may masquerade as a newly hired employee or a relative of somebody in management. As a matter of fact, use your imagination and think, if you were a cracker, what type of hoax or masquerade would you take on to trick somebody into getting inside to get access to a system? Employees should be well trained through security awareness programs to always be on the lookout for impersonators. Always politely ask for identification or authorization, like a guest badge or a card, if they notice somebody that seems like they just don't belong there. Policy may state that employees don't confront suspects, but instead escalate suspicious people to a supervisor, a security guard, or the security team. A hoax is very similar in that the attacker tries to mislead people by presenting a false scenario. Hoaxes can come in person or through other means of communication, like texting and email. A hoax will often be attempted on holidays or other special days during major events, like the U.S. Super Bowl or the World Cup or the Olympics. For example, chain email messages are intended to trick, mislead, or scare recipients into forwarding the messages to many more recipients. In this video, we talked about the impersonation and hoaxing aspect of social engineering. Several years ago, I was doing consulting for a large healthcare company on the East Coast, and it was basically for securing SharePoint front-end, back-end servers for this large organization. And as I got there and I was walking in the building to go get my guest badge for my first day of consulting, I noticed that there were signs on all of the doors. And even once I got in and got off the elevator, I noticed that the same signs were posted at the entry points to different floors. And it was basically a no tailgating policy, that you had to scan your badge every time you entered the building or entered different areas of the floors of the building. So that's actually a social engineering attack. It's quite possible that there's a no tailgating, no piggybacking policy, and that people are supposed to only enter one at a time. In other words, the person in front of you scans their credentials, either their biometrics or their token or whatever they're using, their smart card, and then you just simply walk in behind them without scanning your token. Tailgating is basically getting around single-factor or multi-factor authentication schemes for physical access to buildings, to rooms, or certain high-security areas, such as data centers. It's critical to have solid access control methodologies and the ability to audit access to all the critical areas. Each employee, contractor, or guest must swipe their badge or token with the sensor every time they access protected areas, and no other personnel are allowed to piggyback on their access without using their own token. This may involve one person accessing at a time or using a man-trap configuration. So for example, you may have, let's say, an entry door, and on this entry door, you have to scan against some kind of monitor, your badge, for example, or some other kind of biometric sensor here. Once you get in this door, you have what we call a man-trap area, so you get in here, and then this door will close behind you, and then you have another door which has another type of entry. The access or the biometric may actually be here, but not on the outside door. So the outside door may just be a regular door or one of those carousel things. Once you get through this, you're in the man-trap area where you have to get access. And so if somebody comes in behind you, they're not allowed to piggyback or tailgate on your access. It's often considered a violation of security policy, and there's probably going to be some type of enforcement if users don't comply. So for example, in my scenario at the large healthcare company, it was definitely a violation, and there was enforcement involved if you were caught tailgating or piggybacking. I don't know if it was 3 strikes you're out, but there was definitely enforcement involved. In this video, we talked about social engineering tailgating and or piggybacking. Have you ever seen one of those old movies from the 60s, kind of the beach movies where they've got that, that cool surf music going on and they're somewhere in Southern California and they show some guy on a surfboard and he's got his girlfriend up on his shoulders and he's riding a wave, okay? That's not shoulder surfing, or at least it's not shoulder surfing as we're talking about it, okay? We're talking about an attack, a social engineering attack where the goal is to kind of look over the shoulder of an individual as he or she enters their password information or PIN onto a console or at a monitoring station or really anywhere they can get some access credentials. It's much easier to do this today because we've got camera-equipped mobile devices, so you could be recording somebody standing behind them while they're typing onto their laptop or their workstation, and of course they have no idea. You aren't standing there with a video camera. You've just got your phone. You're pretending to talk to somebody when you're actually recording them. We also know that eyeglasses can be equipped with cameras and monitoring devices. Don't forget, if somebody's sitting across the street in a high-rise building and your screen is facing the window, they can use binoculars, they can use telescopes from nearby buildings, and they can look at screens and keyboards. So you need to be very aware of where your windows are. An example, HIPAA-compliant protection of PHI is necessary by using privacy screens that go on the sides of your workstation and the careful placement of monitors in public traffic areas. In this short video, we described the social engineering act of shoulder surfing. In this video, we're going to look at the social engineering attack of dumpster diving. And yeah, it happens. This is actually a very effective way to do information gathering, even if you have shredded some documents. If you shredded just a small amount of documents and thrown them in the dumpster, it's actually possible to take those few shreds out and reassemble documents. Dumpster diving is an attack where the goal is to reclaim information, important information, PII, corporate information, employees, customers, by inspecting the contents of trash containers and dumpsters. This is especially effective in the first few weeks of the year as users discard old calendars with passwords written on them. It's very important to use licensed and bonded document shredding services. If you're going to be doing some dumpster diving, which, you know what, it may be in your future, because if you're going to get involved in law enforcement or forensics or incident handling, you may actually have to look in dumpsters if your suspect is a corporate insider or a privileged insider. But as part of the reconnaissance attack, the crackers are going to look for credit card information, invoices, receipts. They want to look at the IP addresses that are on memos. They're looking for your internal IP addressing scheme so they can spoof internal hosts and servers. They're going to look for organizational charts. They want to find the names of key employees so they can formulate some special types of email attacks that we'll talk about. They're looking for manuals, charts, any documentation on the types of operating systems you have and the versions, configurations, any memos or sticky notes, basically any documentation that will contribute to their reconnaissance attack, to their information gathering, which is the early phase of a structured malicious attack. In this video, we explored the social engineering attack known as dumpster diving. So let's assume I've been on a big social engineering campaign. I've, dressed up as a pest control guy. I'm impersonating that person. I have to go through, obviously, a tailgating or piggyback to get to a certain area because my guest pass won't allow me in. Once I get in that area, maybe I'll do some shoulder surfing to look for some credentials, spend a few minutes there. Maybe I'll dumpster dive in some of the trash cans in the break rooms, or maybe if I can find an empty office with somebody who's out to lunch or on break, I can go rummage through their trash cans, of course leave the building and then do some more dumpster diving, all to find out some people that I can attack within the organization. Phishing is, without a doubt, one of the most effective vectors for delivering malware that we know today all over the world. The cost to organizations is over $5 billion globally on an annual basis, and over half of the internet users get at least one phishing email every day. The bottom line is some method was used to find out that person's email. There's literally hundreds of ways that could have happened. Social engineering is one of the ways it could have happened. Spear phishing is when you target certain employees. So on the basis of my dumpster diving, or my social engineering calls or emails or text, I'm finding out the email address of certain key employees in certain key departments. And I'm going to formulate special email messages directed just at them. Whaling, on the other hand, is targeting a high-level employee or senior management and directors. There are key indicators in your email messages and webmail to identify phishing attacks. And by the way, this should be part of your security awareness training, and every new employee should go through some phishing awareness training for their email or webmail early on in the hiring process. Here's some examples. There's some vague salutations like "Dear valued customer," or, "Dear very important person." You want to look for suspicious display names or domains. Maybe the actual company name, like the bank or the brokerage firm, is actually farther down in the URL path. So there's several characters before it says, Wells Fargo or whatever. If you move your mouse over hypertext links, it'll show wrong information, or it'll just show an IP address. There's often awkward grammar and misspelled words in phishing attacks because they're not being formulated by somebody whose native language is English. The subject line typically will have something urgent or maybe some intimidating phrase, and the bottom line is your bank or your brokerage firm, they're just not going to communicate with you that way. The email doesn't have any legitimate contact information, or the headers and the logos are spoofed, or the graphics just don't look right. As I mentioned, there should be acceptable use policies and ongoing security awareness training of employees. And remember, this is one of the #1 vectors for delivering malware on the planet. A good exercise would be to go and search Google Images or Bing Images and just look up phishing or spear phishing, and you'll see literally hundreds of examples of screenshots of different types of email and webmail phishing attacks. A lot of them will also have the different areas highlighted or circled or have arrows pointing to them. It's a very good exercise. Some companies are actually moving away from email and using groupware like Microsoft SharePoint as a substitute. A good solution is to use email proxies, let's say like the Cisco ESA, the Email Security Appliance, or many others, to stop this phishing attack or spear phishing or whaling before it reaches the endpoints. In this video, we talked about the dangerous and ubiquitous phishing, spear phishing, and whaling email attacks. Let's talk about watering hole attacks, or attacks that focus on social networking. A watering hole attack is going to leverage a compromised web server to target a particular group or an association. Think of like a community that gets together on the internet that's part of a fraternity or a fraternal order or some organization, so only those members are attacked and the other traffic is untouched. Watering holes will be difficult to identify with traffic analysis because most of the traffic from the infected site is benign. The first phase of the watering hole attack is to determine the websites that the target group often visits, for example on Facebook or LinkedIn. The second phase is to compromise one or more of the websites by loading malware that can identify only the members of that target group. The security policy should strictly define and enforce using social media sites while you're on corporate equipment and corporate provision devices. Employees should be encouraged to not communicate business activities or business information on these types of sites as much as possible. Realize that malicious users can data mine these types of social networking sites and find information about your company or company activities by simply looking at messages that are posted and other communications on these social networking sites. In this video, we talked about watering hole attacks. In this video, we're going to look at vishing and smishing, and this is basically phishing, P-H-I-S-I-N-G, but using a different communication channel. So vishing is basically targeting cell phones, telephones, and voice over IP systems as its vector instead of email. For example, a cracker who's doing vishing is called a visher. They'll make a call spoofing a collection agency and claiming that the potential victim is delinquent in a loan payment. Then they'll attempt to get PII, personally identifiable information, like that person's social security number or credit card information. Smishing uses SMS texting as the vector instead of email. So obviously with smishing, the smisher will only be using text-based information. Smishing is a lot more rare than vishing and phishing, but we're starting to see a substantial amount of growth in this type of SMS texting spam and texting phishing attacks. In this video, we talked about vishing and the visher and smishing and the smisher. In this video, I want to discuss some reasons for why social engineering is so effective, and then why web attacks and email attacks are also very effective. Let's start with social engineering and think about, that young person that's answering the phones for a company, the receptionist, or that new hire. Just getting a phone call from somebody who says they're an authority, like they're in the IT department or with the help desk or the service desk, or even posing as an executive officer, just by nature of that person being hoaxed, is a prime reason for it being effective. They can also feel intimidated if they don't give this person the password or the IP address or the information they want in the organizational chart, then they may be afraid they're going to lose their job. If the new hire has not gone through some really good security awareness training, It's easy to think that this is normal practice, okay? It's kind of like a watering hole effect. The consensus is this kind of phone call happens all the time, so therefore I'm going to go ahead and answer the question. It's very common to get a call from an administrator or a supervisor asking these kinds of questions. Also, it could be scarcity. It could be a situation where it happens so rarely and the employee is so familiar with all the other employees that they feel like, well, this can't be some kind of attack. This is such a rare occurrence. Obviously, they really do need this information. It really is an emergency. And remember, people that are making these phone calls and sending these emails, they're quite brilliant at breaking down people. It can also be familiarity. If you're a privileged insider and you want to steal data, or steal intellectual property and sell it on the dark web, if you know somebody, it's much easier to get that information out of them. You can betray the trust that you built up. And remember that some companies, the target's big enough, the advanced persistent threat, the entity who's performing this APT can actually get somebody hired. They can have a fake background, they can have fake credentials, a fake identity, get that person hired, and then 6 months in, they build familiarity, they build trust, and they steal information. Data gets lost, data gets breached, passwords, credentials, intellectual property, other corporate secrets. And then, of course, if somebody calls and there's a sense of urgency, there's a virus outbreak, there's a malware outbreak, we're under a ransomware attack, and we need this information immediately, obviously somebody's going to respond, step up to the plate, so to speak, and want to be the hero to provide the information necessary to handle the incident. So these are 7 reasons for effectiveness of social engineering: authority, intimidation, consensus, scarcity, familiarity, trust, and urgency. Another question we want to answer is, why are email and web-based attacks so successful? Well, your company has no written policy, no acceptable use policy, an ongoing lack of proper training. Maybe there's just no buy-in from the employees on their role in providing good security of email and their usage of the World Wide Web. Maybe you have no enforcement. If you have a written policy in an AUP, it needs to have enforcement involving write-ups, bringing people in for conferences, and of course ongoing training. Maybe you have poor perimeter security for ESMTP and HTTP or HTTPS, poor endpoint protection, and the proliferation of bring your own device, or the Internet of Things, as new types of commoditized devices make it into your organization. And of course, outdated antivirus and outdated anti-spam. So in this video, we looked at some reasons for effectiveness of social engineering and email and web-based attacks. In this video, we're going to look at clickjacking, which has lots of different names. It's also referred to as user interface redress attacks, a UI redress attack, and UI redressing. With a clickjack attack, the hacker uses several transparent layers to trick users into clicking on a button or a link on another web page when they're actually trying to click on the top level web page. The attacker can hijack clicks meant for their page and route them to another page, often controlled by another domain or application. Keystrokes can also be hijacked with skillfully constructed iframes, for example, iframes that are hidden with negative values, cascading style sheets, and text boxes. Common vectors have been Adobe Flash plugin settings page, Twitter worms, and the Facebook like feature. For example, let's say you build a website that has a button that says, "Click here for a free iPod." However, on the top of your web page, an attacker has loaded an iframe with your mail account and lined up exactly the delete all messages button directly on top of the free iPod button. So someone clicks on the free iPod button, but instead actually clicks on the invisible delete all messages button. So in essence, the hijacker has hijacked the click. I mentioned here the Facebook like feature. There's been clickjacking attacks that abuse that like functionality, where crackers have tricked logged-in Facebook users to arbitrarily like fan pages or links or groups, etc. There's 2 main countermeasures to clickjacking. We want to make sure we transmit the correct X-frame options, HTTP response headers, telling the browser not to permit framing from other web domains. And we want to deploy code in the UI to defend and guarantee that the current frame is the actual top-level window. In this video, you learned about clickjacking. In this video, we're going to explore the general concept of session hijacking. Since TCP is session-oriented, it's the prime target. TCP session hijacking is a common variant of the man-in-the-middle attack. The hacker will sniff to identify the client and server IP addresses and also related port numbers. The cracker then modifies the packet headers to spoof TCP IP packets from the client and then waits to receive the acknowledgement packet from the client communicating with the server. The ACK packet will contain the sequence number of the next packet that the client's expecting. So, the hacker replies to the client using a modified packet with the source address of the server and the destination address of the client. This results in a reset that disconnects the legitimate client. The hacker takes over communications with the server by spoofing the expected sequence number from the ACK that was previously sent from the legitimate client to the server. Remember, this could also be an attack against confidentiality because anything in clear text can be extracted. Tools like Loki that you find in Kali Linux can also be used to redirect traffic through a man-in-the-middle node for data theft and possibly system access through session hijacking. Another popular method of hijacking is ARP spoofing to hijack an ARP communication in IP version 4. In this lesson, you learned about the general concept of session hijacking. Now we know that HTTP uses TCP, but with URL hijacking, the cracker's going to go higher up in the protocol stack up to the application layer with HTTP, relying upon user typing errors when inputting a website address into a web browser client. Groups will often register the misspelled version of a popular URL, then they squat and they wait. And when that user mistypes in that particular domain name, they'll come to their website where they get the drive-by malicious payload. Sometimes hijacking is done to present a lot of webvertisements or offer competitive or different products. Or it can even be the mouthpiece for a social or political cause. In other words, it's hijacked not necessarily to push down malware, but to steal customers and clients, or get on a soapbox. The U.S. government has passed the Anti-Cyber Squatting Consumer Protection Act, ACPA, in 1999 to empower trademark holders with civil damages up to $100,000 U.S. from hijackers and cyber squatters. Now, URL hijacking actually goes by many names, and it's important to know these names because they all really talk about the same type of thing. For example, direct linking, typo squatting, sting sites, which is not basically a website for the Police's lead singer Sting, fake URL, cyber squatting, and brand jacking. In this video, you learned about URL hijacking, or an attack that goes by many other different names. Now in this course, I've already established the fact that typo squatting is synonymous. It's another term for URL hijacking and cyber squatting, but in the Security Plus objectives, it actually listed typo squatting and URL hijacking as two separate topics, so we want to make sure that we understand that typo squatting is a more selective and granular form of URL hijacking. The takeaway here is just to make sure that your security awareness training, your acceptable use policies, encourage users not to type directly into web browser address bars. If possible, to try to use trusted hyperlinks and search engine results. And also, as part of the AUP, you really want to keep your web surfing and your casual web browsing to an absolute minimum while using corporate resources or while at work. You may even want to have separate computers, so during lunchtime or during breaks, these separate computers are in a different guest VLAN or restricted VLAN, in a separate part of the building, like a cafeteria or some other common area, and that those machines only are used for casual web browsing and web surfing. Shimming attacks have been in the news quite a bit lately. The targets of shimmers or shimming attacks have been convenience stores, gas stations, large truck stops, and travel centers, places that have a lot of gas pumps and a lot of traffic with people inside using card readers and ATMs. Shimming is the process of stealing information and money from these point-of-sale systems, these credit card readers, and ATM machines. They're also common at kiosks as well as gas stations and convenience stores. Now, these can be overlays where you actually have the keypad has an exact replica that somebody will lay over the top of it, and as somebody's inputting their information, it's actually going to an RFID reader or some other Bluetooth reader. It could be an attachment, or the cracker, if they have the time and the resources, they can even entirely replace the device itself. And this is a huge problem, and maybe you've heard about it on the news. Some people have even avoided just even using their cards at convenience stores. You also want to be very careful about the ATM machines you're using and examine the devices very carefully that you're inserting or swiping your cards on. Shimming is a huge emerging problem. In this short video, I'm going to define refactoring, which is really kind of an application security issue. Refactoring involves changing an application's source code without actually modifying its characteristics or its attributes. Refactoring is also used in a benign way to introduce legacy applications into new computer systems and devices. So think about the old Nintendo games or the old Sega games that have been refactored into being used in new gaming systems. It's that kind of concept. However, refactoring can also be done maliciously. Okay? It can be done with malware to re-engineer classic attack code to create these hybrids and these variants and these polymorphic viruses and worms. The best type of controls to counter refactoring is to have cloud-based anti-malware solutions that can give you almost up-to-date protection for this type of hybrid code. In this short video, we defined refactoring. Okay, in this exercise, I'm going to give you 5 tasks. I want you to go ahead and take the time to document these 5 tasks either on a piece of paper or using a web processor. Then pause the video, go get the answers, and then come back and we'll compare our answers with each other. So here's your 5 tasks. First, I want you to list 5 examples of impersonation or hoaxing. Then list 3 other names for URL hijacking. Name 4 reasons why email and web-based attacks are so effective. Then list 3 key indicators of phishing attacks in email. And then finally, your 5th task is to list 4 things that could be gained from dumpster diving. I'll give you a hint. One of them is not Kung Pao chicken. Okay? Pause the video and perform the exercise. The first task was to give me 3 examples of impersonation or hoaxing. If you said any 3 of these, janitors, cleaning services, pest control, inspectors, and so on, then you got the right answer. Next, I asked for 3 other names for URL hijacking. If you said any 3 of these, direct linking, typo squatting, sting sites, fake URL, cyber squatting, or brand jacking, then you got the correct answer. Next, I asked for 4 reasons why email and web-based attacks were so successful. If you gave me 4 of any of these, no written policy or AUP, lack of training, no buy-in, no enforcement, poor perimeter security, poor endpoint protection, or outdated antivirus, then you got the right answer. Next, I asked for 3 indicators of phishing attacks in an email. So if you said any 3 of these, vague salutations, suspicious display names or domains, wrong information on links, awkward grammar, misspelled words, urgent in the subject line or intimidating phrases, lack of legitimate contact info, or spoofed headers and spoofed logos, you got the right answer. Finally, I asked for 4 things that can be gained from dumpster diving. You can see the list here: credit card information, invoices, receipts, IP addressing, org charts, names of key employees, and so on. If you said any 4 of these, then you got the right answer. Excellent job.